This is Ted at Valley of the Dolly, looking at the latest information from the Portuguese Institute of Statistics. I can tell you that Portugal's housing prices continue to rise dramatically, but Lisbon's prices are slowing down. At the same time, construction is finally picking up. So the big question is, are we looking at a slowdown in the Lisbon market, or are we looking more towards a solution? Today on Valley of the Dolly. If you look at this chart, you're going to notice that in the last couple years, prices in Portugal overall have risen 18%. If you look at the rise in Lisbon, it's 12%. That's dramatically different. That is, 50% increase in the national numbers versus Lisbon itself. So for the first time in years, Lisbon isn't really leading the market. Lisbon is kind of following the home market in Portugal. And growth has really shifted to the rest of the country. So what's driving this? We've really kind of reached an affordability ceiling in Lisbon. You're also finding that foreign demand is beginning to cool now. Domestic migration has really pushed more buyers out of Lisbon and into the metro area outside of the city limits. And also you're facing really what is just becoming a more mature market in Lisbon. Prices ran ahead of income, and now buyers are looking elsewhere outside of Lisbon. So let's take a look at Lisbon compared to some of these other cities inside of the EU. This I thought was really kind of fascinating, because if you look at Athens, Lisbon, Valencia, and Nice, so if you look at each one of these four markets in the EU, they're at different parts of the cycle in the housing market. So Athens is in the very early part of the cycle, which is why you see these huge increases in home prices there. Then you have Valencia, which is expanding. So obviously prices are affected in this very similar fashion because of that. And then you look at Lisbon, it's in much more of a transitional phase now, that prices are not rising as fast as they were before. And then you look at Nice, which is a much more mature market for homes, and you see that prices are just not rising nearly as fast any longer. So Lisbon isn't uniquely slowing. What it's doing is simply maturing. Lisbon is maturing like Nice, and a lot of other cities like Athens are simply going to need to catch up. So let's look at the Algarve, for example. Foreign buyers have dropped by 13%, and also foreign buyers were, 20% of the market? So you're seeing a decrease in foreign ownership purchases in Portugal, and just a decrease in that sector of the market as foreigners begin to look at other markets inside of the EU to purchase. The end of Portugal's tax schemes has really meant that it's beginning to affect the way that the Portuguese housing market is shaped. It's not a collapse, but it really does mean that who the buyer is beginning to shift. So the real problem may be supply. And let's take a look at Portugal compared to a few other countries that are building a lot more homes in the EU than Portugal is. So if you look at Ireland, they're building 7 homes for about every 1,000 people in the population. And if you look at Portugal, it's 2 to 3 homes for every 1,000 people in the population. And if you look at this chart, you're going to notice that Portugal has very few housing starts compared to a lot of other major European countries in the EU. This means that according to the EOCD, the amount of money that's been invested in the Portuguese housing market is very low compared to a lot of these other countries in the EU. Also, another differentiating factor is the fact that there's very little public housing in Portugal when you compare it against something like Ireland, which has over 10%, closing in on 15% of the market is public housing, which means you don't have this extra cushion of public housing being provided to cushion the needs of some of the community when it comes time for them to buy or rent. But even with this increase in public housing available in Ireland, you've still seen many price shocks happening in the market there as demand has increased and now construction is increasing to fill that demand. But not only is Portugal not building enough housing, but what we're seeing is that productivity in the construction market is much lower in Portugal than it is in many other countries inside of the EU. And this means that we're seeing high prices for materials that go into construction and low productivity in the market as well, If you improve the productivity, that will help improve and offset some of the cost of the increases in materials that we're seeing. So even compared to a lot of other countries inside the EU, Portugal is underbuilding. And really that's why prices continue to rise here. One other thing you're seeing here is the amount of housing that's being utilized inside of Portugal as your primary residence. So if you look at this chart, Portugal is the country with the most units of housing that are not being used as primary residences. So 30% of the homes in this market are not being utilized as a primary residence. So with more utilization of these units as primary residence, that would also take quite a bit of the pressure off of the market as well. But we know that in Portugal, construction continues to rise, but this comes with a 2 to 4 year lag because it takes time for permits to be issued and construction to come. So you're not going to see these additional units hit the market yet. As we begin to see these additional units come to market, though, you're going to start to see supply increases. You're going to begin to see price growth slow, most likely. You're also going to see the market kind of stabilize, and that fever of pricing increases may begin to stabilize as well. I am not a real estate expert or an investment counselor, so it's very important for you to do your own research before you decide to purchase a home. This video is really for entertainment purposes only. But in Portugal, we've also noted or seen that there have been a lot of delays and cancellations in the start of construction of buildings, and that the supply for those buildings, since some of them were canceled, never actually arrives. And this continues to put pressure on pricing for new homes as well. So we don't just need new construction in Portugal, you need to make sure that those units are actually completed as well. So in the end, what are these numbers telling us? It's really telling us that the Portuguese housing market is not crashing, but it is maturing, especially in Lisbon. And for the first time in years, supply is beginning to increase to help meet that demand. The real question is whether or not Portugal can build fast enough to keep these prices from continuing to increase. This is Ted at Valladolid. I look forward to talking with you again soon. Thank you. Bye now.